Hi.
Hello, party people.
We have a very, very special guest today. Someone whose work I have followed and admired for years, long before we started this podcast, long before we even thought we were ever going to have a podcast. I have been a big fan of this person's work. Today we are talking to Zach Skow, who to me is kind of like a celeb. To you guys may or may not be. But he's an incredible person, and we've been really looking forward to this one. He's a champion for so many people, so supportive, so eager to see people succeed in life, in business, in everything. But this is definitely going to be a deep conversation. He has been through a lot in his personal journey, and he's very open about it. He's struggled with addiction from a young age and the ramifications of the addiction on his health that were very severe. And through his healing process, through his work towards sobriety and maintaining his sobriety, he really dove headfirst into service in many different areas that overlap a lot with our passions and our purpose. And he's just an incredible giver to so many different populations of people. He is a dog lover and has a very innovative approach to solving the very serious shelter crisis that we face in California and across the US. And he just has the most beautiful solution, in my opinion, of pairing shelter dogs, dogs that are at risk, with the incarcerated population. And just the overlap of love and healing and saving that goes on in his program is absolutely gorgeous. And we're so excited to talk about it.
This episode is a deep one, but he has so much life experience and wisdom to share with all of us. And I'm just so incredibly grateful that he gave us his afternoon. And I think you guys are going to love him and appreciate him as much as we do. So thank you so much, Zach.
Thank you, Zach.
Here we go.
You're a ledge.
We'll be naming the title of this episode, Fuck Yeah.
Let's fucking go. Chest
Or
bump.
Let's fucking go. That might be better.
Let's fucking go with Zach Skow.
Let's fucking go. Woo!
Woo! Okay, Zach Skow.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's go.
We've been waiting a minute for this, and I'm excited.
I don't know if this is like going to be I'm just bombarded with extremely difficult questions, or if you guys will take it easy on me. Either one, I'm ready.
We are
Either
definitely going to go deep. However, I feel like the level of depth we go to is very much in your hands.
I can swim. I can swim in the deep waters.
We got you. Well, we have a lot to get into because not only do you have
Let's get
a big old story of your own, but you've also made it a point to be a part of a solution of like so many societal issues. So
I'm trying.
we have shit to talk about today. Sure. Let's dig into it. I want to know, where do you come from? Like, what's kind of like the background? What's the portrait of—
I come from 15 miles south of where we sit currently. I was born and raised in Hermosa Beach,
Southern California guy.
Yeah. I have a twin brother. His name is Jeff. He's one of my best friends on the planet. I was born at Cedars-Sinai. Both of us were acutely premature. And then, my parents separated right after that, like right when we got home. They divorced. But yeah, both of them were kind of corporate, so we didn't have a lot of parenting around at all the first 7-8 years. We moved into a house on 9th Street, right up from the beach, with another single mom and her family. So 2 single moms, all their kids running around this house right on the Strand with both parents working, and we were latchkey kids. So we just were raised by the beach our whole life. Just spent every minute down by the beach on skateboards and, bikes and just causing trouble. And it was a different time. So we biked and walked ourselves to school, skateboarded to school and home. Even we were little, like first, second, third grade. You're not getting dropped off by your parents. You're just walking.
Would you say you had a good relationship with your mom and dad and like your kind of family foundation? How would you?
Yeah. My parents got along somewhat decently. Love my dad. I probably program like my dad. I just idolize my father, and he traveled all the time and wore a suit and the way he carried himself. And I mean, I absolutely idolize my mom too. But I think somehow or another you land on one parent. And he was more of an enigma and more like I kind of chased after him because I wasn't around him as much. So you end up chasing after that parent that you don't get to see.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've always had a great relationship. My dad's drank every day that I've known him. My mom, up until she got sober, same thing. So we were surrounded by alcohol.
Okay.
So for as long as I remember, I couldn't wait to drink. Like I could not wait. I think the first drink was at 10. Like when I first started skimming Chardonnay and vodka from my mom. Like one time we were little. I want to say we were 11, maybe 12. We were definitely not in high school. And my mom's, my Uncle Doug passed away of AIDS in 92. And my Uncle Buddy, and there were a lot of other gay friends, who were my mom's community.
Yeah.
And we can get to that later. I'd love to even touch on like how being raised in the gay community or part of that gay community was so important to like who I am today as a man.
That's so interesting.
Sounds counterintuitive, but it's very
so
important.
interesting.
Like I very much learned how to be silly and creative and expressive and communicative and loving like through those guys.
Right.
My dad was so different. My dad was the polar opposite of gay men. And I needed that support that I got from those guys. But one day they were throwing a party, 2 huge bottles of vodka. One was gin, one was vodka that were in our ice box. We had like a 1930s ice box. And I don't know, there was probably 10 of us kids. I don't know. We drank the entire bottle. But yeah, I mean, in terms of, I always equated alcohol and drinking alcohol to being an adult.
Yeah.
And being grown up and being professional and being serious and being worldly and all of those things.
Yeah.
You know, that's what it always meant to me. So I was sneaking as much as I could pretty early on.
So was alcohol your entry point into what you would call your addiction?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I knew very early on that alcohol was my ticket to like a reprieve, like some kind of respite from being stuck between my ears. You know, I went through some things as a child in terms of sexual abuse by a woman who's close to me. And there were repeat scenarios, probably a dozen or so, that were my introduction to like intimacy, you know, and I was not ready for it. So I became very scared of women.
Wow.
And then later on, intimacy in a huge way.
Yeah.
Not being vulnerable or being emotionally intimate, being physically intimate. It scared me to death.
Wow.
Like, so in these situations, I would get trapped in the bedroom and not be able to leave and be extremely scared and having that fight or flight mechanism triggering where you're just wanting to go, to go. And usually I had to wait for this person to fall asleep before I could leave. And, you know, it's very confusing. You know, when you're that little and you're talking about like your first erection, you're talking about your first time you're like, you know, hormones and body chemistry is feeling certain things. And it's just terrifying. It wasn't positive, you know? And so what should have been something that, you know, you get all those butterflies and that feeling and then it transitions into something like lovely or it might be clumsy, but at least you can work through it. For me, it was, I have to get away from this.
Yeah.
And I was an attractive kid, you know, so I had constantly these like opportunities to have girlfriends that were incredible women and girls, but I couldn't deal with it. I really wanted to, and I could like cook them dinner and I could, you know, have conversation. I could hold hands on a walk and talk and talk and talk. But when it came to like being physically intimate, my memory would flash to those experiences. And even though consciously I wasn't thinking about those experiences, my body remembered.
Absolutely.
And my heart would race like you wouldn't believe. And I would sweat. And then whomever I'm with is going to go, what's wrong with you? And then sometimes it would get really cruel. I mean, I got made fun of by women, you know, because I would have these episodes and I didn't know what to do. But alcohol sure helped, you know. Doesn't help you function as a man, you know, but it helped me at least soften those voices that were, you know, you have to leave here. I just had this acute uncomfortableness that made it impossible to be, you know. So that was a big part of why alcohol was so important to me because, you know, you're going through life as a kid and like sometimes women and girls, people are kind of moving them your way and you get close to people and I couldn't deal with it. You know, I absolutely could not deal with it, but alcohol helped me cope. And I just became so dependent on alcohol for a number of situations. I think I had a hard time with expectations. expectations were always very high of me. My nickname was Golden Boy, which I fucking hated,
Wow.
and I could never meet that expectation.
Wow.
And so I just didn't see what people saw in me. And alcohol just always made me feel more comfortable.
Well, I want to say thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, it's obviously your entry point in your path, but
While I'm on the
brave.
subject, I appreciate that. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine.
I just didn't want to. There are a lot of men that have dealt with certain types of childhood sexual trauma, adult sexual trauma.
Yes.
Well, I mean, for real, all it takes is like an incredibly insensitive person, and you can be imprinted with like the worst possible experience that's very difficult to shed. But for me, I found a community of dudes. Shout out Rob Salerno, who it's emotional just to think about, but who really lovingly helped me get through that and confront that. And like even his wife, Christy, there are really special ways that you can bond with other human beings and get through, traumas that you thought were your identity.
Yeah.
And it was so hard for me too, because I was sober. And when I got sober, I'm going, now I really have no way to cope with this.
Yeah.
I am fucked. I'm never going to find a wife. I'm never going to have a long-term relationship because I can't seem to settle into these scenarios. And who's going to want to be with a dude? No one's going to put up with this. It's too in the way. And, I found so many dudes, so many men who are just begging to be able to talk about things like this.
Yeah.
That for whatever reason think it's, will lower their standing or their status as a man.
Yeah.
And to the contrary, it's like, and it's made me very, as a father now, it's made me so much more conscious of like how to behave around my kids and how to help them feel safe and all the rest of it. But yeah, I did some men's work and variety of different types of like recovery circles and even in psychedelic circles that really, I don't want to say I'm past it, but I'm a whole different human being than I was. I'm having this whole renaissance as a 44-year-old man who understands what my needs are, understands what other people's needs are, understands how to communicate about them, and then how to like create a safe space to be intimate, even though it requires a little bit of effort like on my part in order to be comfortable. It's all doable and it's beautiful. And there's a whole, it's like being introduced to a whole portion of life that you didn't know existed, for me, because any type of intimacy was always painful, like because it was so nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And I still have those moments where but I can recognize that my heart's racing.
Mm-hmm.
I can say something too. What a novel concept. You can hold the person's hand that you're with, look them in the eye and say, hey, look, I just want you to know, like, I'm struggling with this. It has nothing to do with you. And they'll be receptive.
Yeah,
they're not going
to
think you're some kind of a less than.
Well, I wanted to say that you speaking on the effect that this experience had on you and has continued to have on you throughout your life and how much that embeds itself in your psyche and causes reactionary behavior and so many painful and unhealthy coping mechanisms just to try to sit with yourself as an individual. And it's such a common thread that I hear people who struggle with addiction or people who struggle with very dysregulated behavior throughout their life is that these really painful experiences become such a part of your identity and you take them on as though there's something so deeply wrong with you and so deeply shameful about you at your core that there are only a few options for how to really deal with that. At least for how it's modeled. Yes.
And I'm going to have to lie about it.
Yeah.
That's the other part is that you don't want to be honest. So it's like, oh, great. This is just me. I'm broken. I'm fundamentally broken. I'm fucked. And I'm just going to have to like fib my way around this forever, because it's just not the case.
Yeah. And I think that it's so important for people to talk about, like, all of us have shit inside of us that we're ashamed of or that we think is just a fucked up part of who we are or something that we think is broken that we don't ever want to admit, that we don't want people to know about, that we're so embarrassed about. And you can talk about these things and other people will be able to relate to you. And the way out is through.
I find it like adorable. Well, I love people's isms and problems and scars. And I think it's great. I think and it adds, a certain diversity to life, and to people. But yeah, I think there's a lot of men that have dealt with specifically familial childhood trauma.
Definitely.
Not just like sexual, but familial, that they, I mean, especially when we talking about prison, like the number of guys that talk about experiencing violence as children and just
All
kind
of
of
them.
like
Yep.
as an
In some way.
afterthought, and some of the things they'll share about. And if you've ever had kids and you see how kids react to trauma when there's something that's energy elevated,
Mhm.
when you see how their bodies like have a trauma response in the real time, whew, you think about these, like some of my students haven't gone through what they've gone through. It's awful to think about, in terms of how
Absolutely.
that.
But I do want to dig into your journey with addiction. You definitely addressed something I was going to ask, which was why the pain and what was the mask needed for. And I
Mm,
am hearing a lot of that from you. And now I kind of want to just hear about once you started having like a real dependence and you started really struggling with your addiction, like what did
mm.
that journey look like? How long was it? Did you try to get sober multiple times? Like what was your
Yeah.
path?
I knew I was an alcoholic at 18. So I remember understanding that I was an alcoholic and that this was my life, and that I was probably physically addicted as well. But because of, my heroes had always been alcoholics, the only confrontation I had with myself was, how am I going to figure out how to live like this? It was just a commitment to figure it out, to figure out however one navigates life as an alcoholic.
How did you know you were an alcoholic?
Because I like, we partied all the time, and I couldn't, socially, I needed it. I needed it to drive. There were times I was so nervous. I think when we have so many things bubbling under the surface and we have to put on this mask, for the most part, you can wake up every day, throw on your mask, and like fucking deal with life. But sometimes that mask gets so heavy, it's so hard to put on, and I just couldn't like step out into public without being intoxicated. And I had to. I went to school fucked up. I was drinking in college constantly. Always had alcohol in my backpack. Always had a fucking big gulp in class drinking. Whether this was San Diego State or any of the colleges I went to. I went on a whirlwind of collegiate tours of junior colleges between San Diego, LA, and Arizona. I got kicked out of San Diego State after a year. We were selling weed, just smoking a lot of weed, doing that kind of stuff. My addiction elevated into cocaine and crack when I was 19, 20 out in Tucson. We were making that, selling that, smoking that. Yeah, just bounced around a lot with that ridiculous kind of, every one of us has our own weird hamster wheel of addiction and alcoholism, but it was not pretty. There was nothing pretty. I was never productive. I was never really successful. I was just like circling the drain for just a number of years. And I couldn't really keep the charade up much longer because I was so full of shit all the time, always struggling, always needing to borrow money, always getting in trouble, getting kicked out, things like that. So my rock bottom finally came in like 2017 when I started to get sick.
2017?
I mean, 2007.
I was about to say 2017. That's later than I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're journeying through. It's obviously, I would assume, as every addict's journey is, it gets more and more difficult the longer it goes on. The physical symptoms, the just
because I could
the
drink
debt, the this, the that, whatever it comes with.
I could drink unreal amounts of alcohol.
Fuck.
So just keeping it up. Yeah, I mean, long story short, the liver and kidneys and all of your filtering organs, they work very well. But if, they become inflamed when you drink. It's just like a muscle when you work out.
Yeah.
And then you take some time off, that inflammation goes down, the internal organ becomes more healthy. But you have to afford it that time to repair. If you don't afford your internal organs time to repair, you're going to get sick.
Yeah.
And I was drinking 7 days a week when I was 17, every night. And then every night up until I was 23, I got in a car accident in 2003 and it broke my chest and my shoulder, which is very painful, and there's nothing they can do. So that's how I became a 24-hour a day drinker, where I'm drinking around the clock. I'm drinking all night. I wake up several times throughout the night. I'm drinking a solo cup full of wine. I'm chugging it, or I'm chugging a triple, quadruple shot of whatever to go back to sleep. And you're doing that all day long. So like when I finally started to get sick and I started to turn yellow and gray and purple, and I started to swell in my stomach like big time, and you could hear liquid, and I didn't know what was going on. I was 27 when I started to get sick. Yeah. Okay. And so Yeah, I mean, long story short, I hid it for as long as possible, like as long as humanly possible. I wore baggy clothes and long sleeve shirts so you couldn't see, and wore glasses so you couldn't see. And I would tan. I would like sit outside so you couldn't see how yellow. I mean, I looked terrible.
Wow.
You know, and my belly button herniated. It would stick out of my shirt. You know, and I would tape it down so you couldn't see it sticking out. You know, and like beginning of 2008, I finally went to the doctor.
Of your own volition?
Yeah, kind of. I was having all these problems, and my dad, he obviously knew, and he's like, "You got to do something." So I was like, "All right," but I was terrified that it had something to do with alcohol. Knew in the back of my mind, and I went to the shitty little Tehachapi hospital, which no longer exists, and the nurse had taken my blood, and she sat me down like in her office, which was weird because they usually do it right there on this little counter, and she brought me in, and I had known her daughter, and she looked white. She had this very concerned look. And as soon as I sat down, she started to like hold my hand and pet me. I was like, what the fuck is this lady doing? You know? And she said, honey, you're in liver failure and you need to go to a hospital like immediately. And I go, well, you know, you don't get it. I've just been out drinking a bunch and I'm fine. And, you know, she goes, no, this isn't like, you don't get this way from a bender. These are readings of your internal organ viability, and your entire internal organ system is failing. Your liver is failing, your kidneys, your pancreas, like you're in really bad shape. And then she said, you know, you need to go to a hospital. You could die, you know, this could kill you. And like right now, I think she said something like, you're dying. So I could not process that, and I just lied. I just said I was fine. I told my dad to no more hard alcohol or something, just only wine or fucking some bullshit. You know, just completely fibbed to him. And I remember the overwhelming, it wasn't like a panic attack, it was like a panic event where my whole life came crashing down because I knew that I had to go to the hospital, and I knew that I was really sick, and I did not want to be alive, and I did not want to live without alcohol. When you get that deep into physical addiction to alcohol, and I could not contemplate me without alcohol. I couldn't think about it. It was preposterous to try to even identify as it was impossible. That's the only thing I really need to say. Is it was an impossibility. So I just lied about it, and I just said I was fine. And then I started to leak blood. I mean, I was already coughing pretty bad, but I started to leak blood from both ends, and my stomach, I was so yellow and I was so big, like it was obvious, you know, that I was in really bad shape. And so for those last like 8 weeks, I just got so sick. And finally my dad took me down and we checked in for long-term care at Bakersfield Memorial Hospital. And my kidneys were shot. So I don't remember the first week. They were stabilizing my kidneys. And so by the time I remember anything, you know, the doctor had told my dad he needs a liver transplant, period. And he's not going to get one. He needs 6 months of sobriety just to qualify. He doesn't have 6 hours of sobriety. I had less than 90 days to live without a transplant. It's called end stage liver failure. It's not even called stage 4. It's just end. You either die or you get a transplant is how that works.
Wow.
And then, I mean, I'm a drug addict. So they had the pain, the pain chart back then, which is the pain chart is just a smiley face, you know?
Yeah.
Straight face, frowny face, frowny, crying face. Frowny, crying face is the shit. That means all of the drugs. That means your choice.
Oh my God.
It was morphine for like a day, and then I like quickly upgraded. And then that's all I thought about for the rest of the time I was there.
Wow.
You just get completely addicted because you're destitute. You're emotionally, spiritually so fucked when you're in a situation like that where you're dying. There's nothing for you there other than the drugs they give you every 4 hours. So
when you say you're emotionally and spiritually depleted, can you explain at all what your internal experience was like in your mental and your...
Yeah, I was just afraid. Yeah, it was just fear. Fear, overwhelming, overriding fear, which then teaches you to chase the drugs that they offer you in the hospital because that was the only thing that would alleviate the panic. It's like a full body panic, you know, where you just, you can't believe it's real. And you're looking at yourself in the mirror going, wow, you know, and I was in a wheelchair and, you know, I looked like the sickest sick person you've ever seen. I mean, my eyes were just completely yellow. My whole skin, there's just bruises everywhere. And Yeah, it was a really bizarre place to be in. And also to have so little hope and to not really, we just desperately needed to get out of there. We needed to get to a hospital that did transplant, but there was no hope for me. I couldn't get into a program.
So then how did you get
So
through
you're
it?
just, good question. So I came to one day in my hospital room and there was Alcoholics Anonymous had sent H&I dudes there. So when you're in an AA meeting and you donate to the basket, there's usually a normal basket and an H&I basket. That's hospitals and institutions. That's where they send groups of dudes to do panels and to intervene to try to help people. So they came to help me. Kevin was his name. He got through liver failure in prison. It was hepatitis C liver failure, which is much different. But nonetheless, he was end stage. Here he was in front of me. And that little bit of hope was profoundly important for my dad because my dad wait, what? You were end stage and here you are. He's all jacked and healthy looking and sober. And so that really motivated him to come up with a solution, so he wasn't going to take no for an answer. Like he would not let me die and he would not let them send me home on hospice. That was the next thing was because, by week 4, it's $1 million. You've been in whatever,
Holy
who
shit.
knows how much. So they're not wanting to keep you there.
Yeah.
Especially if you're going to die. You should just go home, be with your family, So my dad had done all this work through my insurance and was conversing with particularly a nurse at UCLA. And this nurse at UCLA worked for the insurance companies, but was plugged into the system of transplant. And she basically got me an interview at the transplant center at Cedars. So she contacted my dad one day and said, hey, look, like I've spoken to Dr. Tramp's team and they can see your son. By this point, I'd been there for a month and a half. So, and they agreed to see me, which is like, if I get admitted to this program, then all I have to do is survive 6 months and then I'll be eligible. I had a meeting with Dr. Tran and her team and they admitted me to the program. And then she said, if we keep you here, if we admit you to the hospital and we keep you here, you're going to die here. And so we're sending you home. It's going to be hard for you. You got to stay near an emergency room. You're going to have a really hard time. But if you make it 6 months, you'll have your transplant. I had to kick, Dilaudid as soon as I got home. That was like the worst part. And, that was awful. I had my Marley next to me. I was losing my mind. I was so fragile as it was physically to be going through acute opiate withdrawal from that much drugs. Like I was on so many drugs.
Yeah.
I was seeing blood coming out of the skulls and devils and screaming and things that I couldn't tell what was real and what was not real. I could not tell. And Marley, just having my dog's chest, I would just like sit there and feel his chest go up and down and like try to ground me and that was real. And we got through that and then they took me off like all my medication after that. I like took a gamble and that was a really big decision. And then all I wanted to do was take my life when I got home. There was no hope. This was a many months long, hopeless shit show of pain and suffering while I'm putting my family through outrageous amounts of pain and suffering, specifically my dad, who was doing it almost alone. It was a very, very scary time. And when you're aware of how much of a burden you are to people and how incapable you are of being honest with yourself, you just know you're a liability. And I felt like the only thing, and I was so uncomfortable being alive. I was just so uncomfortable being alive. Sometime every second of every day was painful, just existing. I drank again, like a month after I got out of the hospital. My dad had been taking care of me and left to Brazil for a couple of days. He'd been with me for a year at that point, like basically waiting on me. And I just remember thinking I needed to taste it. I needed to I couldn't sleep and I just wanted to taste it. And if I had like a little meal, I just have a glass, I'm in liver failure, right? There's no way I could get fucked up, right? Wrong. And I blacked out. I drank like 2 bottles of wine of my dad's. And then when I woke up, when I came to 2 days later, there was like a box, 2 double bottle. I drove to the store, obviously. Somehow they sold to me. I mean, I looked like the sickest person you've ever seen in your life. I don't know how anyone would. So I got real sick again. And like when he came back, he just broke down and, he just kept saying, you've killed yourself. You've killed yourself. And he was just weeping. And just, you've killed yourself. You've killed yourself. and he couldn't understand. He just couldn't, finally like broke. He couldn't understand like what my commitment was to this fucking vile alcohol. I mean, that he drank every night, you know, that he still consumed. And that was the last drink I had.
Wow.
So that moment is your date of sobriety.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So from that point, you go back to the hospital.
October 12th, I never told the transplant hospital that I drank again. They would have kicked me out.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good idea.
You know, right after that, I just made this like ferocious commitment to life. I mean, what it really happened was I had to figure out how to ditch this suicidal like default. Everything was this default of suicide because you have no control when you're sick. You literally have no control. You can barely walk. You can't feed yourself. I can go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
So I had this moment in my downstairs bathroom where I was looking at myself and I did not recognize who was looking at me in my eyes. Like we all have looked ridiculous in our lives at times or gone through phases or whatever. I was scared at the eyes that were looking back at me. So I'm in my consciousness somewhere and the fucking visage in front of me, I was completely scared by myself and just didn't recognize. And I thought that was my real divine intervention to push me over the edge to just finally leave this planet. And I, you know, looked at my dogs and they were all sitting by the toilet lined up because that's where I'd spent so much time. And they were just looking at me like I'm the fucking shit. Like, not only am I the shit, like I'm the greatest thing they can imagine. I am beautiful inside and out. They don't know what to do without me. You know, all of this. And if you've ever experienced a dog's unconditional love, like if you choose to internalize it, usually we just brush it off. But if you choose to internalize it, it is very profound. And I, for whatever reason, chose to internalize it like in those moments. And I just cried and we cried all that night and I didn't go back to sleep. And that was like the first day of the rest of my life. I did everything for dogs after that point. And it really just started with journaling and walking. I couldn't walk very far. I could barely write. Yeah, at that point, I had been like volunteering for the Humane Society and the local organizations up to before I got sick. And you know, started bringing foster dogs started with 1 and then like real quick 2 and then 3. And then that's all I did was walk dogs like 6-7 times a day up in the mountains.
So you were volunteering as you were sick and then it carried over into
I was
as you were
volunteering before
healing.
I got sick. And then I reinitiated in like October, November, and then all through December of that first year, 2008. Yeah, it was wonderful because all I did was like I gave my life to the dogs completely. You know, all I did was go to meetings. I went to 2 meetings a day and I walked dogs and we just started getting adoption after adoption after adoption, just like burning through them.
Wow.
You know, and started taking on tough dogs. And like all throughout this process, I went from I couldn't jog. I could barely walk. So I went from walking to jogging to hiking to running. And then by the time I got 6 months of sobriety, by the time I qualified for my transplant, and keep in mind, I'm going down there every 2 days in the beginning to Cedars for testing, then every week. And every time I'm going down there, she's going, I don't know what the fuck you're doing up there, but like, keep doing it.
Wow.
And then she'd be like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I just ate well and walked and put myself into service. And that was the ticket. None of which they tell you when you're in a transplant program. They don't tell you what to eat. They tell you to barely stay away from salt. That's about it. That's the only advice they give you. It is the biggest racket you could ever imagine.
That doesn't make any sense.
We don't treat why people are sick. We treat, you know, the after effects of what's happened because they're sick.
That's like
you know?
incarceration. We
Totally,
don't treat why people are hurting.
We're going to punish the behavior, but not address the cause. Exactly.
Can you tell me about your process as you were healing and you looked at your dogs and you saw something in them that was lovable about you? And I just want to know about your process of building confidence through that time, because you speak about yourself as someone who seemingly had such little confidence, and clearly you had to have some to work your way up.
No, I had none. I had to go to meetings to get my liver transplant. So I had to go to meetings. I was so uncomfortable in there too, but they quickly accepted me, especially once I started to look like I was going to survive. So self-confidence comes through action, you know, it only comes through action. And I could either, you know, sit there and also left to my own devices, I was very weak and I was very insecure and nervous. So I had my dog with me all the time. I had Marley with me all the time. I had to re-imprint experiences. I had to re-experience things and then have a new imprint of that experience.
Yeah.
So I started having this community within the program. So I'm like, oh shit, I can be around a whole lot of people and I can talk and be vulnerable in front of a lot of people, and I can cry in front of a lot of people, and I can share my testimony in front of a lot of people. This is great practice.
Yeah.
This is great practice. I just would bring my dog everywhere. And then I started speaking at schools and telling my testimony like fresh in it when I still looked funny. And yeah, I was this yellow liver failure, sober dude with a black pit bull. And my community just kept egging me on and to create Marley's Mutts. And finally, when I was no longer needing the transplant, they're like, you should do this. You should create. I'm like, what? They're like, oh, start a animal rescue. I'm like, you can't, what? They don't let people like me do that. Do they?
Yeah.
And I didn't think they would. I thought I was under this presumption that the IRS wouldn't allow like a drunk in recovery to like pursue his dreams for whatever reason. Like, oh, that's for professional people to have like nonprofit organizations. But no, we filed after that first year, and we've been a nonprofit organization since 2009.
Wow. I need to get into Marley's Mutts. I need to get into your love with
Let's
dogs.
do it.
I want to get a little bit of info from you because I think you might be one of the few resources I'll get to talk to about the shelter crisis and what's going on with animals in California, but also just in the US. That like prison, like addiction, like everything else that's hard is very hidden. And I feel like
the dark corners.
Always. And I want to bring it to light. How many roughly dogs are in shelters in the US and how many are getting euthanized? I feel like that's something that's not
These are
talked about.
debatable numbers, but it's well over 1 million that are being euthanized. But a lot of municipalities, counties will not report. Our city isn't required to report their numbers, right? So they euthanize constantly all week long, and they're not required to. So you kind of have to, there isn't an exact number, but it's over 1 million. And to think about what that is, a human being, several human beings have to hold down each dog, inject them with a sedative, inject them with ethanol, and like hold them down through the process of when they die. Like karmically, the idea of having to carry that out is
insane.
Well, it just goes to show that like how little empathy we have.
Yeah.
We have somehow crossed ourselves up so much that we like to blame shelters for the crisis that our community has created, which is astonishing to me. It is so illogical. I mean, are there shelter managers who don't manage things very well? Absolutely. But is the shelter crisis created because of inadequacies on the shelter level? Absolutely not. It's the sheer volume of animals that we're bringing through the front door.
Okay, so what's the root? Like, what is the root? What is creating that volume? And
the issues are, a population that's looking to procure its dogs from breeders. So there's the need. The demand is there. So if the demand's there, you're always going to have breeders breeding dogs. Spay and neuter is not important. So the casual bred dog that's having 2 or 3 litters in a 7-year period or something like that, you don't think much of that, but that's a lot of damage. So it's, believe it or not, it's something as simple as not spaying and neutering our pets, and then having folks have a tendency to prefer purchasing dogs over adopting.
And here we are euthanizing 1 million a year.
Yeah, astonishing, truly astonishing numbers. That when you think about a westernized country, a country that understands energy and life and certainly the human animal bond, like we call them a man's best friend in America. No one else does it. Like we refer to them as our best friends. And to just think that it's allowed for us to treat our best friend like our worst enemy, to think that that's just status quo and that we don't really have to move far beyond it, that it's just this cultural thorn in our side that we just kind of got to deal with and like just plod forward through is really wild to me. The biggest problem now and why we're not seeing movement is we don't have enforcement. So even if they change the laws or the rules around breeding and we try to put some more teeth into it, there is nowhere near the enforcement that we need. And there's nowhere near the community spay and neuter. When Marley's Mutts got heavy into, we had our own spay and neuter program we put $2.5 million into over a 7-year period, and we achieved no-kill status in Kern County.
Wow.
So with that, not a lot of money, with our cooperation with Kern County Animal Services in 2019, right before the pandemic, we got to below 10% euthanasia, which is technically no kill. And that's possible, by putting the resources into it in a strategic, tactical way, specifically spay and neuter, microchipping, vaccination, things like that, that are your normal kind of like healthcare services for a dog. If those things were provided, it would be some sticker shock like up front. The initial shock of, you want to put how much money into animal welfare for these free programs and what? On the back end, it would be so much more cost effective because we would actually deal with the problem.
So I guess I'm just curious. So you start Marley's Mutts in 2009, and how does that progress into you bringing rescue dogs into prisons?
Yeah, how do you pair incarceration with that?
So we were foster based for the first 9 years, and I needed more fosters. And I had a buddy that got out of prison who we linked him up with a dog, and it changed his whole life. He was a feral dude, and he was destined to go back to prison. He was just really struggled. And once he started giving his testimony and, working with me and my mom was at the mission at this time, and his name's Robbie. Shout out Robbie Miller. Shout out SOS Dog Rescue, Strength of Shadow. Shadow is the dog. She'd been shot. We had to pull a couple lobes of her lungs out, and just a remarkable trajectory shift watching Robbie become the man he became in the pet industry. And so I thought, we can offer this to these guys. We can double our our life-saving capacity. And really my idea was how can we bring both of these elements of our society are sequestered into the shadows. So how can I help bring both of these realities into the forefront? Learning about Robbie's last 8 years of his incarceration, you're just shocked. He was bounced around to Oklahoma, to Alabama, the private prison circuit. And the whole idea of Pawsitive Change was, how can I save more lives using the structure and everything that a prison could offer us in terms of, because it's built to keep people in, they're not going to have to fortify anything. So, these dogs will hopefully provide the benefits I got from working with dogs to these guys. I'm an addict and an alcoholic in recovery, and what I needed was rules, boundaries, discipline, exercise, affection, and love. That's what I needed to get better. And what a foster dog coming from the shelter, having experienced trauma, especially young, large dogs with no context for life, they need rules, boundaries, discipline, exercise, affection, and love. So as you're giving those things to yourself in this structured process of caring for a dog day in and day out, all of their needs, putting their marketing materials together, all of this stuff, you are being of service and you're caring for yourself. So the idea was to structure something similar to what had gotten me sober in prison and have them walk through that program. And
so your first exposure to incarceration was really through your friend Robbie and learning about his experience. And
I had a cousin that spent time in prison and, things like that, but no real experience until Robbie had gotten out. And then I started trying to bring the program in.
So tell us what exactly Pawsitive Change is, what you guys do for the people, and who do you serve?
So Pawsitive Change is a comprehensive inmate canine training program that we have served in 8 facilities: juvenile, women's, men's, state, federal. And the whole point is to provide hope and opportunity to incarcerated people and pets, is to change the trajectory of their lives and leverage their potential. A lot of the incarcerated have been in there since they were kids, former gang members who've only known that life, and we're trying to give them an opportunity to discover who they are, change their trajectory, and achieve their potential. Similarly, a lot of these dogs they're not potty trained. They don't know anything about anything. They're young. They have no context for life. And so the goal is to have these two spirits aid one another and trudge the road of happy destiny.
I love it. And I love that you call the dogs incarcerated dogs, because it's the truth. And no, seriously.
Totally.
And when I speak about the shelter crisis and adopt, don't shop and all that stuff, I find that a lot of people meet me thinking that I'm being overly dramatic or something by the way that I describe it. But if you ever get the opportunity to go into a shelter, it's just undeniable how much it shakes you to your core to see this beautiful spirit locked in the tiniest cage with all the energy in the world to go run, play, share life.
It didn't do anything to
absolutely nothing, even beyond whatever arguments and fears that people have about the incarcerated population of humans that we have. You just can't apply any of those fears to these innocent creatures. So I love that you talk about it like that.
I think everybody should be required to visit shelters to really understand what it is. It's bizarre to me that people, I know exactly what you're talking about. Folks who are on the periphery of the rescue sheltering community will kind of be like, oh yeah, everyone's got that friend who, is obsessed with the shelters, and like, as though we're weird, as though there's something weird about us. Whereas, if I took anyone to Kern County, there's 400 dogs there. Half of them won't ever leave there. And it's just cacophonous, deafening panic barks and cries and whines and moans. And you mean to tell me that you can like walk through that place and not have it touch your heart, not have it make you angry, not have it make you stressed, a little ferocious inside. And the fact that we can just kind of wholesale be okay with murdering like 1 million dogs, whom we're responsible for, by the way. There's this lack of ability collectively to put any responsibility on anyone. No one likes to take as though it's their fault. None of them, they didn't ask to be there. They didn't ask to be brought into this world. We're responsible for them. We brought them into this world, but we don't act like we're responsible for them. And it's really, again, karmically, it's a very heavy place to go. And then of course you can then now understand like why we have so much empathy for visiting prisons, because if you're people, oh God, people in the animal community always say, I just hate people.
We talked about this.
I just hate people.
I talk about this all the
I
time.
just, I hate people. My only role is my dog. And it's like, I can't stand that people will openly talk about hating mankind. Like, I love people. I absolutely love people. We can all, but what does that do to you in terms of your stance? If you're presenting that moving forward through life, talking about how you hate people, where's your empathy? What do you mean you fucking hate people? You hate people?
Yeah.
I'm a person. You're a person. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
You can be frustrated. You can be concerned. But to talk about and to always get like this chuckle, this like affirmative chuckle from people. Oh yeah, I know, me too. Totally. What do you mean? What are you talking about? We fucking need each other. I love you. I love you. Please come back. What are you talking about? It's so counterproductive.
It is. And the lack of empathy that you speak about is something that that's something that causes me to panic, because I'm just like, I really do think that it's a coping mechanism for just all of the overwhelmingly big societal issues that we face, where people honestly unknowingly tap out of their ability to connect with others, especially others that they deem are very different than them, so that they can remain somewhat safe and protected in their minds. And I think that it's so important to keep chipping away at those common phrases that people use and how they actually represent a state of being that so many people have gotten to, where we have tapped out of the ability to really feel others' experience and sit in it with them and commit ourselves to caring about that experience. And God forbid, trying to be of service and consider so many of these issues as our own issue. And they're affecting you to the point that you're tapping out of life. That's what's going on. But you're saying that that it's not your issue, but it is. Very much.
Whereas you could easily just, take the opportunity to educate someone or to inform somebody or to let them know where you're coming from, as opposed to just writing them off and saying, I hate people.
Or you could take the moment to be honest about, what do you actually feel? Maybe you don't actually hate people. Maybe you're really upset and
someone hurt you.
Yes.
Someone hurt you. You're in
And
pain.
that's just what you're projecting, is that, you hate everybody when really you just hate you.
There are so many ways to have productive conversations about what's going on inside of us. But I do think that you've already touched on this in this conversation, and I think one of us has as well. But we don't often learn that we can be honest and open, and it can lead to true community, true belonging,
100%.
true growth, all of these things that we're really craving when we say something like, we hate people.
We had this time in the program at Tehachapi State Prison, and we had 28 students, and 14 we lost overnight to drug overdose and or positive piss tests, right? So all of a sudden, we were week one, brand new program, 8 dogs, 24 guys, or 28 guys, and the program's cut in half.
Wow.
And Tootie died. Arturo Suarez, one of the just best dudes, like one of my favorite people. and I saw him a couple days before he OD'd, and I knew something was wrong, and I didn't say anything, and I gave him a hug and told him I loved him. But after that, we just sat in the back and we got in a circle, and rather than have class, we just talked and we just opened up and we just cried, and we talked about sexual abuse, physical abuse. We just went around in a circle. I talked about their crimes, talked about whose life they took, they were innocent, talked about taking their friends' lives, talked about all of it. We just all opened up. We just all, and I got in a lot of trouble for that. We had a coordinator at the time who could not stand that I was emotional with our students. Could not stand it. And so I saw our program about to fail, and he wanted to just pick up class and let's just whatever. And I'm like, dude, we're not going to have class. They just lost one of their leaders, died in front of them, and 14 other people are 13 others are out of the program. We have to have a come to Jesus like moment. And we did. And, what the guys always tell me is that, vulnerability in prison is a really scary thing because it can make you, come across as a mark. It can have you be targeted for being vulnerable. But the radical vulnerability that those guys brought that day in the back it set the stage for the program we have now, and why we're all so tight, and why we all say I love you to each other. And like Tootie's parents and his son and his sister, they didn't have any pictures of him. He's all, very prison. He had this great Fu Manchu, Chicano mustache, and all the pictures they had of him are him locked up with frowns on his face, just looking intense. And I had a bunch of super good pictures of him just glowing, smiling, huddling, dogs. And I had a video of him. And so they were able to, when he passed, and all my guys did stuff for his funeral. So they, wrote on a bunch of things, but they had the whole dais, at his funeral, was just these incredible positive change pictures of Tootie and
beautiful.
And his family. It was they still check in with me regularly. He died 2 years ago. But you're just talking about, coming together over our weaknesses and our perceived weaknesses and our vulnerabilities and loving on each other through all of our faults.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's something that these programs provide, is that opportunity for the guys to have a space where they can be vulnerable, that's separate from the culture of the actual prison and of what has been cemented as such a violent culture.
Totally.
Not just between the incarcerated guys, but between the guards.
Oh, it's us versus them. Only until recently have I noticed the legitimate change. Only until recently. I really want to hear what you have to say, because you started off with fucking.
I know. I just was going to say they're fucking desperate for it. Yeah. It's not like they're like, oh yes, I'll appease you. Let me play along. Yeah. They are bursting at the seams to share what is on their spirit. In the best possible way. It's the most profound energy I've ever been around. I cannot find it in the real world. I've never been able to find it in the real world. That's the only place that I've ever found that kind of distilled honesty and energy. And I think it also, like what you just said, that experience of losing half of your class to either overdoses or drug use, and then you guys all coming around and having this moment with each other against what they wanted you to do. Yeah. And that leading to the program that you say you have.
Fired. Yeah, I'm sure. It was a whole deal.
But I think that's all to say that that experience led you guys to have the program that you have today, which seems a lot more of a family oriented. Totally. You know what I mean?
It always has been, and we've had trainers who have really offered themselves up. And like you said, well, the reality of emotional exchanges like that, true, like we said, bone marrow, just moments. They do happen a lot in meetings, very much so a lot in meetings, but that's probably the only other place that I experience them other than prison. Because like you said, people are, prisons, right now, it used to be 2.5 million incarcerated in America. Now it's about 1.5 million. But it's all people, almost all of them, the vast, vast, vast majority are just trying to get better, and they're just trying to improve, and they're just trying to figure out life, and they're just trying to be loved, and they're not trying to hurt or hate. They're not, they're just trying to figure it out. And the vast majority have also seen through the kind of gang industrial complex that permeates their regions, and have seen through the motivations and the rewards of that system, and understand it to be fickle, and God damn, we ought to be there for them when they make that decision to get better. Like we have to be there for them
Yeah.
because the downside is that they're going to get out of prison and create a victim. You know, people don't talk about recidivism being it's a synonym for victim creation. You know, when 73% is the recidivism stat for America. 73% will commit a crime and end up back in prison within 5 years. That's astonishing. That is fucking inexcusable at every level because that means victims. It's not just inexcusable from a money standpoint and from a program. Like what program in the history of programs that fails that often should be just continued to be given money, billions of dollars, carte blanche with no accountability. It's hilarious to me. And we've been culturally institutionalized to think, oh no, yeah, that's where we keep the bad people. Our community cares about us, so they keep the bad people over there and dressed up in blue, and then they keep us over here, right? And they suck, right? Categorically, we don't like them, right? Yeah, that's how it goes. And so there's always this built-in excuse for us to really hate on and be evil to and apply principles that we never would apply to anyone else to the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. It's wild. It's the only cross-section of American population that you can openly discriminate against without any fear of blowback or retribution, right? You can just discriminate and for no other reason, just because they committed a crime at some point in their life, which all of us have done.
Exactly.
Every single one of us. And we've made a policy out of punishing people and identifying them with the worst thing that's ever happened in their life, the worst decision they've ever made. And we're just going to ride that into the sunset. It's wild to me. And it's wild to me that we're a nation built on second chances with a Judeo-Christian heart or a Judeo-Christian soul where we understand what it is to be Christ-like and we understand what it is to serve populations.
I don't know that we understand.
Well, I'm just saying,
we claim.
Exactly. We claim it at the it's at the center of our sort of how our culture was built. But I have to really explain it to people to get that kind of a reaction. Their knee-jerk reaction is always, and this is people close to me, like, why would you work? Why would you do what with bad people? But that doesn't, again, if you did a survey, every American citizen, and asked them, have you ever violated your most precious moral, ethical principles? Everyone would raise their hand. Every single person, but yep, I have. Okay, do you judge yourself? Well, yeah, maybe a little, but what about these people? They made a horrific mistake, so often, birthed out of pain and struggle of a childhood that was just, catastrophic. And you want to punish these people for the rest of their existence, make sure that they never turn any of their experience into positivity for our community or culture, which a lot of these, there's so many ways to leverage the incarcerated population currently for the juvenile incarcerated population currently. Like the only thing that's going to save our juvenile population and where they're headed is those that are currently incarcerated. And I've seen the magic that these guys can work. And like having kids really helped me with that too, with having just radical empathy. We got a bunch of death row guys that came over from San Quentin when death row disbanded, and they came into the program. And I was a little nervous about a couple of them in particular, one that I'm still very close with. And I view them all as children, not condescendingly. I view them all as children who deserve to be loved as children, who deserve to be all we want is to feel safe and be believed in. That is what a child wants. I have 2 daughters, so I'm acutely aware that I need to make those kids feel safe, and I need to believe in them, and I need to listen to them. And if I can do that, then the rest of it will fall in place. And we abandon our incarcerated population with those needs. We act like they, we can incubate them in negativity for fucking decades, absolute decades, and then kick them out on the street and be astonished that they reoffended without any sense of irony or
accountability as a culture.
It's wild.
I want to ask, since you brought up recidivism, do you know the recidivism rate of the graduates of your program?
Yeah, it's virtually 0. And we only know of one student. It's
virtually 0. Sorry, I really need to hammer that in.
Yeah, virtually 0.
0 victims. Yeah, and this is just one program.
And one guy came back, and we've had 1,200 graduates.
Holy shit.
And
you're 0?
Yeah. We had one guy come back to prison, and he ended up in our program. So what happened was his family died in a car accident.
Oh God.
He then fell off the wagon and then ended up back in prison and he ended up in a different one of our programs at a different prison. But again, what we fail to identify in the prison system is that there is a rut of drug use and politicking. So you're incarcerated in especially in California, where you're using drugs, you're politicking for your car and or depending on where you are. And that's what you got to do. That's what you're expected. And you will never improve yourself if that's the merry-go-round you're on. You will if that's the path you're navigating, it is going to be extraordinarily hard to get your GED, to program, to do any of those things. That's when you'll end up owing debts, you'll end up getting in, trouble. But if you get out of that rut into a program groove and you can address sobriety first and foremost, because you need that to get into a program groove, you can't be fucked up. You can't be fucked up in the dog program, really, because we're counting on you. All the energy that you're transmitting through that leash is going into that dog, and you have to be responsible for that. And so we're constantly going over about what's passing through your transom you're responsible for, and you have to identify and you have to talk it out. You have to come grab me, you have to grab one of your teammates, and you got to figure it out. And sometimes we're not that nice about it. Like, quit bringing your shit. You have to work it out, talk about it, breathe through it. Don't just fucking put your shoulders back and I think you're going to muscle your way through this dog because you're tough,
Yeah.
But if you can work on sobriety, anything is possible in prison. Anything is possible. And prison could be turned into a place where there's so much leveraging of potential. But if you don't have sobriety, or if you're not working on it, you have nothing. You cannot be successful, I don't believe, in prison if you're in that rut. But the programming groove, especially since the First Step Act in 2008 and some of the things that Newsom, Prop 47 in particular, California's done a great job of making certain changes that have allowed for programming, people like Scott Budnick and the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. And it's all possible, but you need to have programs like ours to pull people off the yard. You need to have programs like Pawsitive Change to get people off the yard, get them plugged into something healthy, get them plugged into something where they're interacting outside of their race. And remember, that dog represents home. It's a little furry medicine ball that's it metaphorically represents home. It's giving you the vibes of home. So it's putting you on that track.
Yeah.
So until we recognize that incubating people in abject negativity for however long they're incarcerated is not the way forward.
Absolutely.
Surrounding them with only concrete and steel and no organic anything, no meaningful interactions, no outlets. But yeah, we definitely need a lot more. I mean, God, you guys had a family member, so you got the window into it. You got to recognize, oh, dude, this is my brother. This is someone who deserves better than this, regardless of what their crime is or what what they were accused of. They deserve better. But because so many people, especially in the decision maker cultural echo chambers, don't have anyone don't really understand what the system is. It's still kind of hidden and it hasn't really been exposed.
And even if people, for whatever reason, can't tap enough into their empathy to be able to say these people deserve better, you have to continue to go back to the well and recognize what is real about how we take care of them, address them, has the most profound impact on, like you said, creating more victims potentially, or creating more safety in our communities. Like, whether or not you have empathy for somebody that you are making up a lot of narratives about in your head who's sitting in a cage right now, what you think you're saying is that I have empathy for their victim. I have empathy for potential victims out here.
Yeah, exactly.
No, you don't. You don't.
You don't, no.
Because what you are investing into mentally, emotionally, energetically, financially, how you vote is creating way more victims than the 0% recidivism rate of the guy who's sitting in this living room right now, who's going into prisons, caring for these guys and giving them an opportunity to emote, learn about themselves.
Yeah. Not to mention victimizing the person who's incarcerated.
Absolutely.
Who started as a victim. We talk about this all the time. Going into prisons is victim advocacy work, if we're being honest.
Yeah. And the resources exist. There's a lot of really interesting, I think I touched on it with you guys, that I got to do a restorative justice experience, with one of my students and then his victim's mother, so he is in for a loss of life crime. And I'd never heard of this. I couldn't believe that I'd never heard of it, but I got to sit down with my student and with the mother of his victim. And we, for 8 hours, we just unpacked it all and we loved on each other. And she mothered us, both of us. We shared scriptures and thoughts and dreams and goals and apologies and Jesus, like that's where it is. And why don't we see that mandated? Why don't we see that? Why don't we see, and the guy that facilitated it did 30 years in prison. He'd only been out for 3 or 4 years. So he was our space holder. And it was just like, there are a lot of these, what we've needed, and why positive change, I think, is so rad in terms of recidivism and the potential impact, is that we've always assumed that there's needed to be some element, some pillar of our economy that would accept the incarcerated. So then you have the pet industry, and it's this $115 billion industry. It's recession proof. It's built on second chances in many ways. And all we've seen is just radical acceptance of our guys into the community, so and virtually any role within that community, whether it's retail or training or kennel technician or behaviorist or whatever, they're capable of it, especially if they've been in the program for several rounds. Like, they are professionals. They're with their dogs 13 and a half hours a day, every day for 14 weeks. That's a long fucking time, And so, but believe me, the system itself doesn't want it to be that way. Like, the first times our guys, Daniel always tells me about when he applied at Petco, and he got his high school degree and then 3 college degrees in there, and he graduated Pawsitive Change like 5 times. He had more degrees than you know what to do with. But he applied for PetSmart and Petco, and they just came back and said he didn't meet the minimum requirement. And clearly it was because he's a felon, but they just came back and said, and so we tried to, blast at him on Twitter and social media and stuff. But the deck is stacked against, but so many people that we know, they all want to work with our guys. And everybody's been able to find, as entrepreneurs, an opportunity for themselves in the space. And the training economy can't keep up. So there's a true need for them. So if we keep doing this and we can scale this into a bunch of prisons, there's no reason why we can't have 5,000 in each state. I mean, the needs are that profound year over year in terms of trainers and pet industry professionals. The industry can't keep up.
I love it. Well, I think you've already been talking about this, but why do you do what you do? Why do you keep showing up for these people? What motivates you? What drives you? Like, where's the fire burning from?
Oh boy. What drives me to be involved with the prison population, both current and formerly incarcerated, is a sense of community and relatability with like what they're going through. I struggled for so long to find out my identity, and there's so many barriers that I didn't know how to get through, and such an aching loneliness. I felt like I just couldn't relate to anybody. And I know a lot of my struggle was very similar to what a lot of my students' struggle is. So that's like maybe what got me into it. It keeps me sober. It keeps me plugged in. Like, the groove that I feel like I'm in when I'm doing that work is I'm right where I'm supposed to be. And I've always really dreamt for that kind of awareness about what I want to do and where I want to be. And I've never felt it. Even with rescue, I'm like, I'm fucking fraudulent over here. I don't know, I don't know why, but working with those guys, because I'm just being me. I'm just real. I'm just me. I'm going to love you. I'm going to talk about what a degenerate I've been, and we're going to get through this. I don't have to do anything but be me. They don't expect, I don't have to look a certain way. I don't have to be any way but me. And there's radical acceptance in there. So like, why I continue to come back constantly is because I'm accepted, but more so is I see this positive streak that I get to leave behind me, and I see it and I feel it getting picked up constantly. I feel my guys picking it up and then starting their own positive streaks. And then before you know it, there's just all this positive energy floating around that yard, and everybody's talking to each other, and they're getting along, and they're dapping each other up, and they're saying, I love you. And I've always wanted to be altruistically effective. Like, I've always wanted to affect suffering. And there's no greater place. Like, we talk about walking into a shelter and feeling the barking and the energy, and you really acutely feel the suffering and the struggle when you go into a prison and you spend time in there. And I guess God gave me an energy and a disposition that is able to affect that in a positive way. And so I feel like I'm good at it. And I know that, like, it sounds weird. And this is another thing that our previous positive change coordinator, tried to get me fired for. He would say, you go into prison for your own fucking therapy. And I was like, well, you're not wrong. And that sounds weird, but like we are a community, and in a community, I'm not just supposed to be the teacher or the confidant who's always preaching from his soapbox. I got to be a real human being sometimes too, and I'm going through some shit, and I'm fucking hurting. And if I just come in here in front and act like I'm not going through some shit, you're gonna see through me and understand, that I'm full of shit. So I need to bring it and be real and tell you like I'm going through this divorce. Like my guys were there for me. I don't know that I had really too many friends reach out to me when I was, maybe because they were scared or worried or didn't know how to. Everybody in prison did. Everybody, they're like, oh, like they see me coming, they couldn't get to me quicker. Yo, dude, how we doing, dude? We all right? How was fucking court? Talk to me. And like that love and they genuinely care. They genuinely love me. And I don't know, I've always looked for that community. I've always I feel as comfortable and as accepted. There's this radical acceptance in AA and NA. Like you walk into that room, and you're just like, oh God, thank God I'm here. I can just be weird and just whatever I am, I'm okay. I'm here. This is my people. They accept me no matter what. And I feel that same kind of acceptance in prison, but I also feel like probably you guys do, like we're contributing to a genre that's desperate for us.
Yes.
That like really needs us. And you're on the ground floor of something really profound in terms of the more we continue to like strengthen our connections and relationships and then like get better at what we do and master the terminology and all the variables and data, like we can make a real profound difference for fucking tens of thousands of people and families and kids. And so I think it's a combination of all those things. And also I think it feels good I think most people have an inherent drive to like root for an underdog, and they're the like utmost underdogs.
Ultimate.
Yeah.
No, but you were saying that you go in and you go for therapy yourself, and I've said this on probably way too many episodes, but what Carly and I get from that experience, I don't think those guys can even start to grasp. Like we're the free staff that's coming in. I can't even begin to explain to them, to you. Honestly, I'm still coming to terms with it myself. It's cracked me open in a way and has sent me really deep, which has been hard in certain ways. But the mirror that they give me and the space that they give me to be myself and to self-reflect on my own experience and my experience with Ryan and his experience through them. And it's like, it's profound. And anyone who says you're selfish for it, I don't know. It feels like the most like interactive, wholesome human experience where we're just equally feeding into each other in ways that
I feel like that's the definition of service though. Like that's almost trying to weirdly warp and say that service is selfish, but service is beautiful for a million reasons, but one of them being the benefits you get from it as an individual, the emotional, spiritual benefits that you get. And being of service, like you said, takes you out of the constant awareness of self and allows you to connect on a very real level with another individual and to escape your pain and absorb the joy of connection and also the blessing that it is to be a blessing to somebody else.
Oh, dude, 1,000%. All of what you just said. Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons we get so stoked about what we do is because it's like we've found this this neglected cross-section of our population that we've absolutely fallen in love with, that we know everyone else too. It's like we recognize the value and all of these wonderful things that exist within this population. And I don't know, hopefully someday soon, everyone else will too.
I think the last thing I want to ask you, just on a human level, I love hearing about how people think about life. I love all the different perspectives. You've overcome a lot yourself. You also work daily with people who are in constant pursuit of overcoming their traumas, their pain, their hurt. And all of us are going through something right now. So what do you think is some like tangible advice or something that you can offer for people who are going through it right now, who might feel alone, isolated, wanting to get out of addiction or just overcome the part of themselves that stands before them, stopping them from moving forward?
You're going to hate this as my like default answer, but it's just the truest one, is that you have to serve. If you keep on this trajectory of serving yourself, of looking at your problems through your lens to serve yourself, it just never seems to happen. It doesn't ever seem to get better. you're such a part of the problem that having you even involved is
Mhm.
but once you step outside of yourself and I think it just makes things more real. You tend to understand what is real from what is not real. But
Mhm.
we're all meandering through our own little complicated, painful struggle. And it's so much easier when we've got each other's backs. And it's not that hard to have, like, everybody's back. You can, believe it or not, pass through this world and have everyone's back. You can support and love everybody. Like I abide by this principle of love all, serve all. And some people are like, oh, yeah, love all, serve all. What about blah, blah, blah? Yeah, like them too. And it sounds like an extreme stance. Like, what about shitty people? You
Mhm.
love shitty people and serve them? And it's like, yes. And the quicker we understand that, then the better we'll be. And I have found that, like, there are a couple that I don't really enjoy interacting with
Mhm.
on the yard. Two in particular that I can think of. I always have a little, like, I always have to get myself ready for them. Usually because they're spun out too, so it's just really difficult to. I know I'm going to get that, like, strung out energy.
Mhm.
But every time I confront it and get through it, God damn, I feel so great. And we both always feel better afterwards. And he's always got a Bible verse for me too. So I know, but I always have fear with specifically one gentleman in particular, but I'm always wrong about it. I'm always grateful and it's always a long walk and he's always by himself on the pull-up bars. So it's always like I'm walking to him and he never has a shirt on. So I know it's going to take a while. And, like, I've even watched him over the last couple of months become like a totally different dude, And now he says, I love you to me now too. We all say I love you and I'm proud of you and those kinds of things. And, but yeah, service is it.
And community.
Definitely. Yeah.
Love it. Zach Skow, I feel like we could talk for a million hours.
Dude, let's do another.
Let's do it.
Hey.
Let's go. Bumping mics.
Yes.
Cheers.
That was awesome.
You're done. Thank
Cool.
you.